Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butts, get big or get out.
You know, it's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network since 2009. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Culture and Flavor is a podcast about food and culture centered in Black and Indigenous foodways. Hosted by myself, Zella Palmer, right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Each episode features high vibrational conversations with cultural bearers, chefs, farmers, scholars, barbecue pitmasters, and more. Where there is flavor, there is history. Join me on Culture and Flavor and all of my guests as we share stories that will have you praise dancing, cooking, conjuring, and inspiring your culinary journey. Welcome to Culture and Flavor, everyone. This is another beautiful episode. I'm so excited today to talk with the lovely Angela Locklear Queen. I've been following her on social media for quite some time, and we finally have a chance to really have a great conversation, and we've been passing each other. We went, I'll explain everything, but I guess we were in the same place. We found out we were in the same place at the same time a year ago. So I'm so excited to talk to her for this episode. And I just wanted to talk about just, the South and how your last name is your birthright. And it tells you who your people are, your lineage, the sacrifice, the love, and it reveals many rivers that they have crossed. I was named after my mother's grandmother, Zella Locklear. My late mother's mission, for as long as I can remember, was to tell the stories of her lineage from eastern North Carolina. The story of her great-grandparents, Arthur and Melissa Locklear, who were small farmers in North Carolina, and eventually how they all had to leave for Indianapolis during a very tumultuous time when a scourge of white supremacy created an extremely hostile and violent environment for Native Americans. They organized a group of Locklears to leave. I have picked up the torch from my mother after she passed, and, while she was alive. She was always searching, researching, and spending time in North Carolina to walk where they walked, reclaim what was taken, and to tell their stories. In the final moments of my mother's life, I was able to reflect on our last trip together in 2019 when we attended the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina powwow. I remember a rainbow appeared after a hard rain. She shed some tears and said they are here with us. For many, it's a long journey to return to the land and to remember. On today's episode of Culture and Flavor, we welcome Angela Queen, the author of Native American Herbal Medicine for Beginners. Angela has been decolonizing wellness herbalism spaces for almost 20 years. Today, she uses her extensive knowledge in herbalism and nutrition as a marketing professional, supporting consciousness and ethical brands that choose to avoid appropriation and make a difference in the world. Additionally, Angela nurtures an herbal tea brand called Elemental Herbal Teas. Angela is a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina and has always felt a strong connection to the southern landscape. She wrote her first book in 2022 to provide a foundation of herbal knowledge through the lens of Native American culture. Her book features multiple plants native to Turtle Island and 75 unique recipes to help you build your own herbal apothecary. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Zella. It's so wonderful to be here.
It is so wonderful to talk to you. I've just been watching your journey because I'm always, kind of on social media just looking for Locklears.
Same.
And, I saw I've just been watching your journey, and it's been really inspiring. And I purchased your book when you released it. And, just you talking about just your own personal healing journey and reclaiming your roots. Can you talk a little bit about just your journey to your book that is out now on Amazon? I'm going to definitely promote it. Native American Herbal Medicine, 75 Natural Remedies for Wellness and Balance. So if you could just talk a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I worked in the health and wellness field for several years in the retail capacity, and it didn't leave me much time to connect with the earth, and I had always just dreamed of it while I was working. I was in management, so I worked several hours a week. And when I decided to stay home with my daughter, I said, I'm ready to plant this garden. And I had done some gardening periodically throughout the years and learned I was not very good at growing vegetables. My grandmother, she was amazing at growing vegetables, but I was not. So I said, well, I'm going to grow herbs because I've read that they are very self-sufficient and can endure a lot. So I said, well, I'm going to grow herbs. And I just started my herb garden when I was 8 months pregnant. And I remember thinking about the women in my family, my ancestors. Every time that got really difficult and it got hot and I had this big belly and I was planting these seeds, and I just thought, they had no choice but to farm the land. And I'm here with gratitude and the ability to choose. And that just felt so large to me. It felt, I don't know, like I said, there was an immense gratitude for everything they've done to get us to where we're at now, and that I had that ability to choose. So I planted those seeds and watched those plants grow. And to be honest, the first year I had a lot of plants, but I didn't harvest many of them because by then I had my baby and I was just overwhelmed. And it was hot. I'm here in the South and it was very hot. So I gave in and I let the garden just sit there. But all of these plants went to seed. And the next year, all of these little seedlings came up without any of my work. And they just multiplied all over my yard. And I was like, and wow, did the gratitude of abundance set in. And I would collect all of these herbs and I would dry them and I would put them in pretty jars and build up my apothecary. And my husband says, what are you going to do with all of these dried herbs? You're just collecting them. And, I was just really caught up in the moment of awe and how these plants just came out of nowhere, and that I knew that there was a greater force behind them, bringing them into presence for me. And I said, well, maybe I think I'll create a tea blend, because I had years of herbal knowledge. So I said, I'm going to create a little tea blend, and I'm going to see if my friends and family will buy it just to give me a little supplemental money for my garden. And I had a little herbal newsletter that I would send to friends and family. So I said, I'll put it there and see if anybody will buy it. And a couple moms from the community found my tea and they posted about it on Facebook. And the holistic moms community is pretty strong here. And next thing you knew, I had moms asking me, do you have a tea for this? Do you have a tea for this? What about this? And I thought about it. I said, well, I have a lot of knowledge. I have a lot of passion. And maybe this is the next step. So I just went into my little apothecary and started formulating with a variety of herbs and creating new teas. And there it was born.
In your book, you talked about the 4 sacred medicines. And, just I think about North Carolina, and I just also think about indigenous practices throughout the U.S. and how so much has been stolen, but, and erased. But now I do feel, and it's fascinating to see social media and this age where you see Native communities sharing information with each other, letting, people know we're here, we're doing the work, we've always been doing the work, but now we can connect in a deeper way, and we can, pass this information on to each other. And you talked about the 4 sacred medicines. And I just, it warmed my heart, because I was just thinking about cedar and so many medicinal properties of cedar, sage, sweetgrass, tobacco, and when you think about North Carolina and how much they produced, they were the number 1 state to produce tobacco for the country. And unfortunately, tobacco became, a commercial product that, kills many people. Unfortunately, it makes people a lot of sick, but originally it was a medicinal plant. Can you talk a little bit about that? And it was religious as well, I should say.
Yeah. Including the sacred plants in here was a challenging decision, to be honest with you. And, it came from the publisher, and I had always been a little bit sensitive about including ceremonial herbs in a mass production, just because I don't want them to be commercialized and commoditized. And, I just felt a sense of protection, not only for me, but also other tribes, because if you take something like white sage, it doesn't grow here in the East. So the tribes that it's really connected to are in California. So I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't also crossing a boundary, and supplying information that wasn't a plant that was specific to my people. And like you said, tobacco is very specific to my people. Like, I hear stories of, one of my grandparents, she had to work the fields, and she had tobacco poisoning a lot of times and would just get sick, she said. And my grandfather actually quit school at 15 to work the tobacco fields. And like you said, it became a commercialized product. But to our people before that, it was a ceremonial herb. So it was used in prayer. It was used to acknowledge birth and marriage and death. So I just really wanted to pay respect to that and that herb, that plant that's so connected to my people.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you did a great job of just giving, just what it is, a beginner's guide to Native American herbal medicine, because it is, heartbreaking when you see sage everywhere, mm-hmm. and just, and not, I don't think that people fully understand sometimes, that when we put, yes, we want people to heal, that people should heal, etc. But, let's not overproduce. And, the U.S. has a habit sometimes of doing that. And, just capitalism in general has a habit of overproducing things, and to the point where it's just watered down, and, the people that it was meant for can't use it anymore. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that, we have a lot of healing to do, just in general in this world as humans. But I want to go into something that you quoted John Lawson's book, History of North Carolina, where he wrote, among all the discoveries of America by the French and Spaniards, I wonder why none of them were so kind to have kept a catalog of the illnesses they found natives able to cure. Why did you put that statement in there? And I wanted you to expound upon that a little bit.
Wow. I just wanted it to be known that the indigenous people knew the way that plants could heal us for centuries before colonists showed up, and that it wasn't documented. And I wanted to impress that, there was a herbal surge in the 70s that Native American people were left out of. And many of the herbs that were taken by, those that led that surge in the 70s, many of those that the information they learned from Native peoples, or it was rooted in Native practices and even African American practices, but they were excluded from that. Not only to mention that until the Religion Act was passed, Native Americans, it wasn't legal to practice ceremonial acts, which typically connected to plant medicine. So I did want to make sure that that was in the book. So I hope that I got that message across in the brief way that I could.
I think you really did. And, just for those who are listening, that was in 1978 where the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was signed, and indigenous people didn't have the freedom to practice their traditional ways. I mean, that was, in the 70s, and the 70s wasn't that long ago, and even just when you think about powwows and, indigenous rights, land grabbing, the Dakota pipeline. I could go on and on and on. It's always been a fight. And, when you think about just even powwows today, I remember being with a friend of mine, Zella and Angela, who is also Lumbee. And we were at the Coheri Tribal Center, another tribe in North Carolina. And I remember Mr. Greg crying, just tears of joy, but also, the realization that his granddaughter can now dress in regalia, and he was made fun of when he was growing up, and it was looked down upon, right? And so even just having your book out, just to start the conversation, I think opens up the doors for not only for non-natives to learn, but for Native communities to start having these conversations, just like you said in your own community. They said, oh, can I get some of those herbs? Can I get some of those teas? So I just want to applaud you for listening to your ancestors and hearing the call and, going forward with that. And in their book, you have sections in here just listing some of the different herbal, different herbs and best storage practices. And it's funny because I remember during COVID, I was in Walmart and I remember standing and just, everybody was in a panic trying to get, food. And all of a sudden I would look to my left and I remember seeing all of these people just standing in the vitamin and, herbal sections, and everybody was trying to figure out how to cure themselves, and then everybody was, buying elderberry and we shouldn't have to wait until, something as tragic as COVID happens to learn about what this land has to offer. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the essential herbs that we need to know?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too. During the pandemic, it became very difficult to access herbs, and that is a time that my tea business took a little bit of a break, on top of having children at home to homeschool. So yeah, the pandemic really changed things in the herbal sphere. I believe that some of my favorites to have on hand are elderberry, of course, that helps with the immune system. Let's see, hibiscus. I love hibiscus, and it's great for kids because it has that bright pink color, so you're able to kind of make it into a little bit of a juice, and it's high in vitamin C. I think any type of mints just really support the digestive system with being like a calming herb, so that it's really easily accessible. And I always just think of that accessibility and ease of use, because there's so many plants that do multiple actions. So, but how can you get one plant that's easy to use, very accessible, and could work on different levels? So I definitely think the mints, elderberry is growing now in the Southeast. It's going through its transition of becoming berries from flowers. Let's see. I think that's all I have right now.
Okay. And I remember there's this book by Michelle E. Lee, Dr. Michelle E. Lee, and she writes a lot about, the medicinal and religious purposes of different herbs. And it's called Working the Roots Over 400 Years of Traditional African American Healing Herbs. And she talked about yellow root in North Carolina and how, it used to grow abundantly, and how, it was used for medicinal purposes. And, now it's, one of those herbs that's basically endangered. What are some of the herbs that are endangered that we need to, figure out how to save seeds, or, work with indigenous communities to make sure that we don't, lose them? And I know sage is definitely one of them, but, do you know of any other ones?
Ginseng is another one. So, and I know in the Western North Carolina mountains that they do a lot to protect that plant. I have a friend that does a lot to protect the plant. So, and, I'm familiar with the book that you mentioned, and it's a beautiful book. And like you said, yellow root is one. So I tried to avoid those types of plants in the book because I didn't want to perpetuate that, and we need to have a greater understanding. So the United Plant Savers Association is a good website to access to learn more about plants that are endangered. And like you said, white sage is a really big one, and that's just another that I just try to protect by not showing it on social media, not perpetuating just, the commercialization of it. So because it is poached on a regular basis, and like you said before, it just doesn't give access to the indigenous peoples of that land that need to have access to continue to teach their traditions to the youth and to continue on with their ceremonies with that plant.
And I've also seen you, I think I saw one of your videos where you talked about passion flower. Can you talk a little bit about passion flower? It's such a beautiful, it's such a beautiful herb. I mean, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, passion flower is one of my favorites. Like you said, it is beautiful with this bright purple flower and these little, these little fingers that come out of it. It is a vining plant that grows all over the Southeast, and it is commonly used for stress and anxiety. Traditionally, the Native Americans used it for menstrual pain because it has a sedative action to it. So, and I also read whenever I was doing research for the book, and I had not read this before, that they use the juice of the root for eye infections. I wouldn't recommend anyone try that now unless they are highly trained by someone, but I just found that interesting, so I included that in the book. I've never used the root. I use the aerial parts, which are the leaves and the flowers, and we actually went picking them yesterday. So passion flower spreads like crazy. So it's, wherever you find a patch, you're going to find a bunch of it. And it's also the one food source for the fritillary butterfly. So I love that aspect. So I never harvest the whole entire plant. I'll harvest tender leaves and the flowers, and I leave the bulk of it for the butterflies and, just for the wildlife.
Another herb that you talked about, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but could you just give a little background about it? Because you wrote such a beautiful story about it. The black drink, is it Yopan holly?
Yeah, Yopan holly. That is actually a shrub that grows native here. And like you said, it can be consumed in what they call a black drink. So it has theobromine in it. So try to think. Yeah, so it helps with the mood, and a little bit of energy. And it was consumed instead of coffee a lot of times. And it was a beautiful ceremonial drink. And you have to roast the leaves to get that black color. So, but it is delicious.
And you quoted in your book from the Travels of William Bartram, 1791. Wow. Bartram wrote, "Our chief with the rest of the white people in town took their seats according to order. Tobacco and pipes were brought. The calumet was lighted and smoke, circulating to the usual forms and ceremony. And afterward, black drink conclude the feast." Fascinating. I mean, the research that you included and some of the stories that you included in this book, I think is really profound. And even though it's a beginner's guide to learning about apothecary, I still think just your own background and and being Lumbee and definitely the research that you've done to include specific to North Carolina, I think is so beautiful.
Thank you, and thank you for quoting that part of the book. Yeah. I had a word count that I had to stick to with the publisher, but my goal was to fit as much information there as possible while sticking to the word count. So I had to get creative.
So beautiful. And then in the end, you also offer recipes, different relief teas. There's passion flower, stress relief tea. I mark the ones that I definitely want to try, and I definitely want to buy some of your teas. Health energy balls, the black drink that we talked about, the opan tea, milkweed seed bombs. I mean, so many different, just a taste of what, we can do to avoid going to the hospital, on all the diseases that most BIPOC communities are afflicted by, When I also think about pine tip tea, and I think about North Carolina and just not only North Carolina, but other states that have, pine trees and how the land is so sacred and how, we've lost a lot of trees. I mean, we see that not only in the States, but in places like Brazil and the Amazon, and just how indigenous people are always being threatened and pushed out and are the cultivators and caretakers of the land. And you have a recipe for pine tip tea. Can you talk a little bit about just why pine trees are so sacred to indigenous people in North Carolina? And I think, just for our listeners, North Carolina has some of the largest tribes, and and for Lumbees alone, 55,000. There are 55,000 members. There's the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. There's Hallowasaponi. There's Coharie. There's Cherokee, and so many other ones. So I wanted to just lift up those tribes in North Carolina and those across the states who are either, not, I hate that word, but who are tribes, whether they are getting federal funds or not, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about just your pine tip tea and just how sacred pine trees are to North Carolina. And Florida, I think you mentioned that too.
Yes. I just think of, the Lumbee. We're the people of the pine. And I remember my grandmother making pine needle baskets. They're just they're our relatives, right? Mm-hmm. They've been here from beginning of time, and we just have such a strong connection with them. And then the pine tip tea and the nourishing qualities of it, the vitamin C, and it's great for the immune system. And I think I mentioned in the book about the collecting resin as a livelihood for the Eastern tribes. And I know that there was a group from Lumberton, from Pembroke, that ended up in Augusta, Georgia, if I'm correct. and they were collecting turpentine. So yeah, there's a deep connection and tradition with the trees there and throughout the eastern part of the country.
For those who are, searching to find more about just herbs, why should they read your book?
I feel like my book is an accessible starting point to learn more about herbs. And, I put a lot of consideration in there to make sure that it was approachable for natives, non-natives. And I also thought about how would someone feel. So there was a lot of thought that went behind that because, I had to work with what the publisher was asking me to write about, and we had to go back and forth on certain aspects, like writing about sacred ceremonies, which I was just pretty adamant that I couldn't cross that line. And that's where the elements came into, because as I reflected on those sacred ceremonies, I said, well, the elements play a big part in ceremony, whether it's air, fire, earth. Sweat Lodge is very earth oriented, and the elements transcend culture, that they're in so many non-native cultures and or native cultures and non-native cultures actually. So that made it a little more approachable, and it just connected more with me of like how, if it was a reconnecting native coming to my book, wanting to learn more about their culture, how would they feel if they've never participated in a ceremony? So, just acknowledging that I want to bring everyone to the table for this conversation. So I want a native person to feel respected when they read the book, that I didn't cross any lines to teach anything that I wasn't, I say capable, or it wasn't it just wasn't right, So I had to acknowledge, like, does this feel right in my spirit to teach this part? And is it mine to teach? Because, there's over 500 tribes in this country, and I'm not going to know everything when it comes to plant medicine. And even when considering the herb profiles, because I had to do 30, and I'm way more acquainted with the Southeast, but they wanted me to, of course, include plants from across the Turtle Islands. So I said, well, I'm going to do this, but I have to acknowledge in myself that I don't know this plant as intimately as someone from say the Navajo tribe, in the desert, that I don't know this desert plant. So I hope that I can give it the respect that it deserves and the respect that they deserve. So there was that perspective as a native person coming to read it, maybe a reconnecting native person, and then, a non-native. And how could I bring all this together and make sure that it's a safe book, that provides a foundation of information just to move you to one step, and then hopefully it intrigues you enough to learn more about your native population in your area. Was one of my goals, is to make sure, start with where you're at and learn those plants that are in your circle and connect to the tribe in your area to ask them, what plants, tell me more about these plants, because they're going to be your greatest resource. And then, and I think that the recipes were able to showcase some of that merging together, because whenever I had to create the recipes, there's 75, like you said. And I said, there's no way I'm going to do this by only using plants that native peoples used. So I had to bring in herbs and spices from India and Asia. And, and that part to me was just really exciting, to start to see that rainbow of European herbs, because mint is native to Europe, and it was brought over here, and it's culinary herb, but you can't have these beautiful teas without having that bright flavor of an herb like mint. So I really reflected on how we are bringing so many cultures together in herbalism, and that each need to be acknowledged on their own, but that they work together now to supply us with so many amazing flavors, textures, and health benefits. And that's what I look at whenever I'm formulating is flavor, texture, health benefits. Like, how can I make this very like artistic, approachable, and really fun also.
And you have a section in your book on nutrition, which is so important when you look at, just alone, just in indigenous communities and, like I said, BIPOC communities, we are all victims of, just this, fast food generation, genetically modified foods. And, we have to return to a better way of taking care of ourselves. And we have to listen to indigenous community members and, because otherwise we'll continue. And those who, are practitioners, people like yourself who are doing the work and putting out the information so that we can heal our communities. Some of the recipes that you have included herb-infused bone broth, pineapple weed and coconut granola, sumac lemonade, ultimate tonic tea, mountain mint mouthwash. I mean, that's the oral health, and that's really cool as well. But I wanted to just, talk about just North Carolina and collards, and talk about just how, we have these ingredients, and we talk about Southern cuisine when we talk about like even just Southern teas and, all these dishes that eventually have become mainstream, but we have moved away from how sacred they are, and when to pick them, when to only eat them, and when to eat them in season. And I think about collard sandwiches, which, Lumbees are known for. If you go to any of the Lumbee powwows or homecoming, you can try an authentic Lumbee collard sandwich, which is mind blowing. And, the collards are not a year round, they're picked at a certain time. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more just about your idea of nutrition and how we can move forward, thinking about indigenous recipes, thinking about, like you said, using other indigenous ingredients from abroad that can add also to, our health.
Oh, I love a good collard sandwich.
Me too. I make it hungry.
Oh, no. And one of my grandmother, she insisted I learn how to make corn fritters before she passed. Yeah, so I did master that somewhat. And I love the fact that, like, those corn fritters are, they're actually are fry bread. It's like people connect fry bread with Native Americans, but in the Southeast, that corn fritter, to me, that's our fry bread, and there's collard sandwich. And, there's so much nutrition in collards. I mean, they're full of minerals. It's just really the way of cooking. But honestly, I feel like, we use bacon fat. So I think that getting away from any type of processed fats is really the main way to stay within integrity of our indigenous foods and then health. Because a little bit of animal fat isn't necessarily bad. It's just having that balance with these foods. But I also remember, my grandmother loved to grow zucchini, squash, cucumbers. So we had a lot of fresh vegetables too, lima beans. I remember shucking corn. So all of those fresh vegetables and coming from the farm, where it retains so many of the nutrients, that's where it's at, and all the flavor that we can continue to have. And, we probably don't give enough credit to eating in community also. That when you're able to eat with people that you're connected to, whether that's kin or just friends and family, and having joy around food rather than stress around food, rather than just mere survival around food. That makes such a difference within our nervous system and the way that we're processing foods. So I think that's important to remember, is that when you eat with joy and that tradition and that connection with your community and your people, like, wow, that is significant to your health and the way that your body is breaking down that food, versus if you're just eating out of survival and you're eating alone and your nervous system is heightened. You know, when we can just let down our guard and enjoy meals together, and even enjoy that chocolate cake without guilt and without
we were
stress.
talking about your chocolate cake. Yes. Was it your grandmother's chocolate cake?
Oh, I have a great aunt that makes a delicious one. My grandmother made a pound cake that was amazing. Her pound cake was good.
You're so right, because even just, thinking about, I remember, just visiting Fuller's Barbecue, and, I remember, when you go into Fuller's, you just, there's this whole like buffet, and there's more vegetables than there are proteins. And I think we forget that. We become such a meat consumed, country, and, processed meat. And even, when in the book that I put out recently with Ed Mitchell and Ryan Mitchell, we talked a lot about that. Just in North Carolina, people have the idea that, everybody's eating pork all the time. And that's not the case, and especially if you're raising your own animals, what's going in those animals, Mm-hmm. And once the genetically modified foods and all the other things, and even, what's happening with pine trees, my friend Jesslyn always talks about how, the contaminants from the environment are, hurting the pine trees. So it's affecting indigenous communities, because when you make the pine tea, then you're also ingesting all of those contaminants from the environment, We'll be right back with Angela, Locklear Queen. Can't wait to talk more about Native American Herbal Medicine, 75 natural remedies for wellness and balance.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network. Roberta's was founded in Bushwick in 2008 and has become one of the most iconic restaurants in the country. HRN made its home inside of Roberta's in 2009, and together they have become part of the DIY fabric of the neighborhood. Roberta's is open for lunch and dinners 7 days a week and serves much more than just the famous wood-fired pizzas. Their team dreams up new salads, pastas, and sandwiches on the regular. Roberta's Tiki Bar is alive and well in the back garden, serving up frozen drinks in the summer and hot toddies in the winter. Stop by the bakery and takeout spot next door for fresh breads, sticky buns, and pizzas to go. But Roberta's also extends beyond Bushwick, with multiple locations in New York City, Long Island, and Los Angeles. You can also find their frozen pies in grocery stores around the country. The spirit of Roberta's, like Heritage Radio Network, is everywhere. Here's to many more years of pizza-powered radio. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
And we're back with Angela, Locklear Queen. And I just wanted to go back and talk a little bit about just, even though, how do you feel about social media? I mean, it's great in some ways, in the sense that, I see a lot of indigenous communities sharing knowledge, sharing, pride. And then I also see another side of it where you're seeing indigenous herbal medicines, herbal practices being used for commercial use, as well as, the idea of farm to table, the idea of foraging, right? And I'm sure some people, their intentions might be definitely pure, but there's also another side of it, that a darker side, that kind of, removes us away from who should be foraging and who we should be supporting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Wow. Yes, that's a big one. I love social media. I love being able to connect with people from the Lumbee tribe, other tribes, and learn from them. I really limit how many of the other plant and herbalist accounts I follow, because you're right, there is a lot of promoting in a way that doesn't really honor the land, and I wanted to point out in the book that foraging is less than what you can take. It's more about listening and building a mindfulness with the land around you. And I really, early on, I think I foraged a little bit more than necessary. And then the more I got into it, the more I was like, you don't need to take any plants, honestly, at times, that you just sit with the plant and you ask it, like, what do I need from you? And do I need to take a little, And I'm super cautious about sharing my foraging with people. I've seen accounts that do it, and I think, oh, well, I might get more views if I do this or do that. But ultimately, the views aren't as important as me honoring my practice with the land. And whenever I'm foraging or just spending time like with the plants outdoors, it really is a time for me to connect with the Creator and connect with something bigger. So it's not something I care to videotape a lot of times or to educate about. And I think that there's an immense responsibility when it comes to foraging. One, to make sure that what you're gathering is actually the plant that you think it is, because there's lookalikes out there, and it could become really irresponsible to educate people on social media because they can't see the small details of the plant to know exactly. And we've got videos that are a minute and a half. So you can't possibly educate well enough to make sure that they're getting the right plant. And I don't want that responsibility on me, that somebody collects the wrong plant and causes, health issues within themselves. And then, like you said, it's, over foraging, poaching of plants become a thing. Golden seal is poached often. The white sage is poached. So that's just a system that I choose not to feed into. And I try to let people know that it's really more about building that connection with the environment around you, more so than gathering. Unless you know for sure, like, this is a safe place to gather, because you have to consider pollutants. Like, are you aware that that area has not been sprayed, and that there's not some type of runoff of water that is contaminated that's coming into that area? Are you aware of whether that plant is endangered, like you mentioned before, or if it's having a year where the growth is lesser? And then the ecology around that of like what animals depend on those plants. So there's so much to know and understand to be able to forage responsibly, that I think that it really just can't, it's very difficult to do it on social media. And the best way to learn, once again, is connecting with your local tribe if possible, and supporting the knowledgeable person within that tribe if you can find one, and being respectful of what they don't want to teach you, what they're choosing to hold sacred for themselves, and honoring that, and through if you're able to hire somebody from the tribe to teach you more about that, the land and the plants that grow there, through that, you're giving back to the tribe, and you're offering, potentially a job to someone who has this special knowledge, and really lifting them up, and showing them that their knowledge is important and respected and valuable. So, I just don't think that we're all meant to learn everything, and that we can look to those that have really honed in that knowledge for, could be decades, or who was passed down that knowledge, and really lift them up and support them.
This was such a great conversation, Angela. I'm so happy that you joined, and I'm so, glad that we finally were able to, just have this conversation. And, I encourage my listeners to purchase, and support Angela, and, definitely Elemental Herbal Teas, her company, and just learn and listen. That's the biggest takeaway, I think, from this conversation, is to listen, protect, and, listen to indigenous communities and allow them to be, not just allow, but remove yourself from the situation so that finally, can return to the land and caretake and cultivate the land as it should be, because we've lost so much from colonization. When you look at even just historically, the abundance of plants, herbs, foodways, culture, sacred practices, so much was taken away. So, I'm so grateful that, we're in this age where hopefully we will see a huge turnaround for all indigenous communities. So thank you, Angela, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is a lovely conversation, and all the points you brought up about the book were just amazing and beautiful. Thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. And like you said, it's all about listening, and indigenous herbalists are still kind of on the outside when it comes to herbal conferences and education. So I really hope that just conversations like this will start to change that and bring more spotlight to the wisdom keepers of our people.
And I can't wait to see you again, and eat some collard sandwiches. You know what I mean?
Yes, girl, yes. We're going to have to line up in North Carolina.
Have a good old time. And where can people find you and, support your work, support definitely Elemental Herbal Teas, and follow you on social media?
So I'm very active on my personal Instagram, which is a.dawn Dawn Locklear. So it's a.dawn Locklear on Instagram. And then I will tag my businesses throughout my profile page there. So those are easy to find. And my website is www.elemental-teas.com.
Thank you, Angela, for joining us. And thank you, Heritage Radio Network, and all of our listeners. And thank you for our advertisers who support Culture and Flavor. Have a great day. Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.